A couple of sermons. We're going to emphasize that again this morning, but we're also going to take a look at why we should tell the truth. If you have your outline, you might want to take a quick look at that. And you'll notice we have the ABCs of telling the truth and why. First of all, we want to put off the old self, the old way of living before we came to Christ. Secondly, point B, we want to put on the new self. We don't want to just be standing there naked, having gotten rid of a lot of stuff, the old clothing of the old way of life. We want to robe ourselves in the new clothing of the new self. And the reason why we want to do this is because we're members of one body or of one another, okay? As the text that Larry read this morning prior to his prayer from Ephesians 4 says. Let's look at Ephesians 4, beginning in verse 25, and we're going to read beginning in verse 20 and go through verse 25. That is not how you had learned Christ. He's picking up in midstream here, and he's saying, here's the old way of living. Here's how we used to live, but that's not how we've learned to live in a different way. It's not how we learned Christ, who is the truth, and how we ought to live if we're modeling our lives after him. Assuming that you've heard about him and were taught in him as the truth is in Jesus. If you want to know what is true and what's the way we ought to do it as true human beings, look at Jesus, who robed himself in human flesh. To put off our old self, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt through deceitful desires, and to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. Therefore, having put away falsehood, and here's our main text of this morning, having done that, it's a thing of the past. We've put away the lie, literally. Let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Put off the old self, the lie, or as you see there on your outline, we've given us the Greek word pseudos. Put off the pseudo way of living. From that Latin word there, we get several words. Pseudos, we talk about pseudoscience, or we talk about a pseudonym. Have you heard that expression used? A pseudonym can refer to a pen name. An author uses a name that's not the real name, but the one they use when they write. If you want to sound like you're from the upper crust, you call it your nom de plume. Or a stage name. A lot of actors, instead of using their actual name, use a stage name because it has more appeal. For example, do you know who Marion Robert Morrison is? John Wayne. Now, can you imagine Marion Robert Morrison saying, "Saddle up"? Come on, Marion. Doesn't quite have the impact that I'm John Wayne and this is the way we're going to do it. So there is that stage name. And then if you're moonlighting and doing work at night, like the anniversary man here, Bill Kirkpatrick, you have aliases, which are pseudo names. You know, when you want to rob a bank, you don't give your real signature, you give an alias, okay? So we want to put off the false, put off the falsehood, the old way, the pseudo way of living. Now, it's really much a part of our culture, isn't it? We might ask, how do I lie to thee? Let me count the ways. We even have different ways of classifying them. We have whoppers, we have white lies, half-truths, fibs, gossip lies, exaggerations, misleading silences, where you're supposed to draw the wrong conclusion, lying on paper, or lying at home, lying at work, lies that make you look better, or lies that make others look bad. Now, maybe we ought to say just a word for the benefit of silence. We're not saying that all silence is necessarily a lie. Sometimes it's more appropriate to be silent, as our sign outside says this morning, that Grandma gave good advice when she said to always tell the truth, just don't always be telling it. There are times when silence is the wiser thing, and you're not being deceptive, you're not lying because you choose not to bring up something at an inopportune moment. Inside your bulletin, you see that there are a number of ways that we are not truthful with each other. There's the half-truth. You sort of tell the truth, but not the whole truth. And that's why when Wayne goes to the court, he's used to hearing, do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? We're trying to narrow it down to where there's no wiggle room there, to where what one said, either verbally or by silence, is actually a good reflection of what's true and actual. You tell your employer, I wasn't feeling well, which is sort of true. But then, of course, you make a miraculous recovery in the afternoon, enough to go to the movie or to go shopping. I wasn't feeling well, and I didn't want to inflict harm on someone else by my bug or whatever it is. You have the white lie, which is supposedly innocent, that doesn't hurt anyone. Yes, your new hairdo is beautiful. Ever been there, brothers? Or, thank you, I just love fruitcake. I heard someone had a theory that there's only one fruitcake in the world, but it keeps getting passed around every Christmas, And maybe you've passed it around too, and you've said, I love fruitcake, but no one ever eats it. But they thank the individual for it when it comes to them. But it's a great regift if you're looking for one. The lies that cover for someone or for ourselves. The boss is in the next room, but you say, he's not here right now to take your call. How many times have you heard that over the phone and you're wondering, is that true? That's the kind of culture we live in. But we want to put that away from us in this new life. There's exaggeration. You stretch the story a bit to make yourself look better or to evoke sympathy. And if someone maybe dresses it up for you and makes you look better, silence, rather than correcting them for overdoing it. The silent lie. Someone assumes something about you which you know is untrue, but their mistaken view makes you look good, so why interrupt that? Evasive lies. We change the subject, or we don't directly answer the question. Now, sometimes silence, again, is appropriate here if we've been told something in confidence and it's not ours to tell. And we just may have to say sometimes, I'm not allowed, to speak about that. We also bend the truth by cheating on our income taxes. Just kind of throw that in since April 15th is right around the corner here. As we get closer to it, I've already got one of the signs I want to put up on the on our signboard out here that the IRS believes you have what it takes. And that's true. Think about it if it didn't hit you all there of a sudden. Well, we cheat on our income taxes, and always with the justification that the government wastes so much money or that the tax system is unfair to the little guy. And of course, I'm the little guy, right? Or we pilfer from our employer with the rationalization that they don't pay me enough. Or if the clerk at the store makes a mistake to our advantage, we don't say anything to make it right. We figure, well, they overcharge for everything anyway. Has the clerk ever made a mistake in your favor and you went back to straighten it out? There was the fellow that was overpaid by his employer, and there was a mistake. But he thought, well, everyone makes mistakes, and he kept the money. The next time he was paid, there was another mistake, but this time he was shortchanged. So he went to his employer and he says, you shortchanged my check. And he got the check in the record. He said, sure enough, we did shortchange you, but we also noticed we overpaid you the last time. He said, one mistake I can overlook, but this is twice now. We have a way of rationalizing, justifying, don't we, when we're not always completely honest. Maybe some other lies that you've heard. How do we lie? And I'm kind of getting away from my outline here. How do we lie? Well, have you ever heard this one? The check's in the mail. That's a very popular one. I'll start my diet tomorrow. I never got your message. I'm not mad at you. Well, you look mad. One size fits all. How many things have you bought, because the advertiser said one size fits all? And, just as a matter of practicality, I don't like to buy anything anymore that doesn't have Expandomatic in it, in the name, if it's clothing. How about this? The politicians' old go-to. Let me be perfectly frank, or I want to be very clear about this. Then after you've heard it, you think, what'd he say? And then here's the pious person's favorite lie. I'll pray for you. That's the Facebook lie. And it's the face-to-face lie. Well, it's great if you do say that, but if you do it, it's actually even better than that. Why do we lie? Well, I think one of the big reasons we lie is because of fear. We're afraid of certain things. We're maybe afraid of losing approval that someone has of us, losing their respect, losing face. We don't want to wind up with egg on our face. We may have a fear of punishment. And so, how often has the little one put him or herself in the robes of George Washington and said, I cannot tell a lie. He did it. Fear that the punishment might come onto me. A number of years ago, back in my Maverick days, when I was driving a Ford Maverick, I was on Belmont coming from the Save Mart direction toward Firebaugh, and it was nighttime, and I noticed some bright lights. As I'm noticing a bright light in the car right now, could someone, this is not my glow, this is from that vehicle out there. Could someone pull those drapes out there? I would appreciate it if you would do it. Scott, it's on the right side. Whoops. Okay. That helps. Thank you. I was driving my old Maverick on Belmont towards Firebaugh, and I noticed these lights behind me that seemed rather bright. And it was a good distance away there, but just to kind of get away from the glare, I sped up. Well, by the time I got to Firebaugh, I could see the car a little clearer, and I noticed there was a rack on it, on the top. And that sort of looked like law enforcement. In fact, I was pretty sure it was. So I became a pious driver. I was just, very, very good at this. And I was driving very carefully, trying to remember what is the speed limit on Belmont. I didn't know. What is the speed limit on Firebaugh? I wasn't sure, but there's a stop sign up there. Whoa, nearly went through that stop sign. And just on the other side of the stop sign, he pulled me over. And he said, "Do you know how fast you were driving on Belmont?" And I said, "No, sir, I don't." Which was the truth, because my dashboard was dark. It was broken. I didn't feel like it would be the best time to tell him the whole truth, that I have a defective car as well as going, at a too fast speed, because there might be extra punishment attached to the fine. You not only are going to have to pay this money, but you're going to have to pay to get your dashboard fixed. And that was one of the good things about the Maverick. You didn't have to fix the thing. It managed to keep going. Larry bought that. Well, okay, get another view from him. After it quit at 309,000 miles, I sold it to Larry. And the dashboard, the odometer at least, was telling the truth, Larry, on that. But sometimes we fear punishment, so we don't tell the truth, or maybe the whole truth, that might get us into deeper trouble. The fear of sometimes of disturbing the peace. Have you ever shaded the truth because you feared disturbing the peace? And you said something like this: "If I told my boss the truth, he would blow his stack. So I don't bring something up." Now, that might be a wise time to be silent. She says, "If I told my husband how I really feel about his constant traveling, he would get defensive." He says, "If I told my wife how frustrated I am with our love life, she would accuse me of having a one-track mind. If I told my teacher the real reason I didn't finish my paper, she would dock my grade." So we stick with the old story, the dog ate it. Well, we can go on and on as the ways that we are sometimes tempted to be less than truthful because of fear, because of disturbing the peace. And another reason that we sometimes lie is these deceitful desires that our text talked about. I like John Piper's description. He says, the other thing that goes with fear is greed. Sometimes we have greedy desires. It may be greed for money, it may be greed for praise or approval, or it may be a combination of both. We may have a greed to impress somebody, so we drop names, and if the person's name that we dropped showed up, he or she would say, "Who are you?" But we dropped their name in a deceptive sort of way, like we were tight, we were on good terms with each other. We sometimes stretch the truth because we want to please others. And so we say, "I'll see you Sunday." I've heard that one many times. And at the time you say it, you don't mean it, but it'll make him feel better. No, it won't. People come through asking for help, and they tell me how they're going to repay, and they tell me all nice stories, and I'm very tempted to say, "Look, I'm not expecting repayment. Don't add lying to laziness." Okay? I haven't said that yet, but I thought it'd be a good line sometime to use. Sometimes we have this greedy desire to get revenge. It's a deceitful desire because when we try to get revenge, as the old saying goes, is when you do that, dig two graves. One for the person you retaliate against and one for yourself, because revenge will eat away at you as well as the others. There's a story in the Bible of Ananias and Sapphira. What were they greedy for? What were their deceitful desires? They wanted the money. They sold their property, and they sold it for more than what they gave. And when they gave it, they said, this is all that we got out of the property sale. It was a lie. They combined the two there. They were greedy for the money, but they were also greedy for the approval of being so generous. And judgment was pronounced immediately on Ananias and Sapphira. Well, if we put away the old self, the false self, we want to put on the new self, or the truth. Ephesians 4:15, which we looked at not long ago, we ought to speak the truth in love. Anytime we speak the truth to others or even to ourselves, and we finally admit, this is who I am, and I have a difficult time with being honest and telling the truth, do it in a loving way. If you know you're loved by God, even if you're deceptive, even if you haven't been that honest, you know that His love is still there. You can accept the times when you fail for whatever reason. We want to put on the new self. We want to speak the truth, first of all, to ourselves, being honest with ourselves, being honest with others, but not brutal. We speak the truth in love, growing in every way more and more like Christ, who is the head of His body, this one thing that we're all a part of, His body, the church. Paul spoke of the time when he had to speak the truth to one of his fellow apostles. And I think he spoke it in love. He said, this is the way it was. When Peter came to Antioch, I had to oppose him to his face, for what he did was very wrong. Can't you imagine one apostle saying to another, brother, that's just not Christian conduct? But it was needed. And sometimes we need someone to speak the truth to us. When he first arrived, he ate with the Gentile believers who were not circumcised. But afterward, when some friends of James came, Peter would not eat with the Gentiles anymore. He was afraid of criticism. There's the fear. From these people who insisted on the necessity of circumcision. As a result, other Jewish believers followed Peter's hypocrisy, and even Barnabas was led astray by their hypocrisy. When I saw that they were not following the truth of the gospel message, notice here hypocrisy goes counter to the truth of the gospel. When I saw that, I said to Peter in front of all the others, since you, a Jew by birth, have discarded the Jewish laws and are living like a Gentile, you got a problem with Gentiles and eating with Gentiles? You're one of them. You're one of those Gentile sinners. That's who you're acting like right now. That's very, very direct. Why are you now trying to make these Gentiles follow the Jewish traditions? If you want them to be more Jewish, why don't you be more Jewish? If Jewish means religious, you're being irreligious. You're being a Gentile sinner. And so Paul spoke directly to Peter about being truthful in the way we deal in our relations with others. Put on the new self, the truth. We are being created or recreated to be like God. And we know that the truth, as our text tells us this morning, the truth is in Jesus. God is the source of truth. Satan is the father of lies. So we need to ask that question this morning as we think about ourselves honestly. Who's your daddy? Do you belong to the Father of truth, the source of all truth? Or do you, as Jesus said to his religious people, do you do what your father does, who's the father of lies? Because you've not put off that old nature. Why should we put on this truth and this honest nature toward ourselves and toward others and to God? Sometimes we may have to confess to myself that I'm not honest. Sometimes we may have to confess to God, forgive me for being dishonest. And then we may have to confess to others at times, forgive me for not being straightforward with you. Why should we put on the truth? change our lifestyle from false to true because we're members one of another or of one body. Different translations translate it both ways there. The passages that are at the bottom of your outline there show you how the truth is being emphasized throughout this little letter of Ephesians. But I want us to think here of what Paul was doing when he says we're members of the body of Christ. I want us to think, if you can imagine what it would be like if we started being truthful in love with one another, with ourselves, with God. Imagine what it would be like to be in a neighborhood or a city of truth. If you grew up in the hood, what kind of neighborhood would you like to grow up in? We're neighbors. And if you look on the back of your bulletin, there's a quote there from Justin Buzzard. And Justin, by the way, is the preacher where Daniel Kunkel goes to church. And I've read some of his material, and I feel that Daniel's in good hands with this church where he is and this preacher. The text out of Exodus, the 9th commandment, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And then Justin says, why does this command have the added phrase against your neighbor? Why not just say don't lie, following the format of the other commandments? Your neighbor needs you to speak the truth. We can't have healthy relationships in community without truth-telling. This commandment was given for the sake of community. Where lies damage and destroy community, truth-telling allows community to flourish. Now, I want you to notice this text from Zechariah. We've been doing Zechariah. We just finished last Wednesday night. If you've missed that, I don't want to hear any excuses because it might be close to a lie. But if you've missed that, we're going to give you a chance to get back in on Malachi this Wednesday night. Zechariah was talking to a group of exiles who needed to put off a former lifestyle, a false lifestyle that got them into captivity. They were coming back home to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple that had been destroyed, to rebuild the wall around the city for protection, to rebuild their lives. And he wants them to imagine what this rebuilding would be like. Thus says the Lord, I will return to Zion and will dwell in the midst of Jerusalem. And then Jerusalem will be called the city of truth. Wouldn't that be a great description for the people of God? We are the city of truth. And the mountain of the Lord of hosts will be called the holy mountain. These are the things that all of you shall do. Speak all of you, every man, the truth to his neighbor. Paul was quoting from Zechariah when he says we ought to speak the truth to our neighbor because we're members of one another. Speak the truth to your neighbor. Execute the judgment of truth and peace in your gates. Why should we speak the truth to one another? Why should we be a city of truth? Why should we be a neighborhood of truth? Because we are neighbors of one another, because we are members of one another. It's like if the nerve endings in your body didn't tell your brain the truth, and the nerve endings were telling you that the mouth is here where your eye is, and so you started to put in some food and you poked your eye instead of the brain accurately telling you the truth, your mouth is just below that. We inflict harm on each other if we're not being truthful with each other. We inflict bodily harm if our brain is not telling us the truth because the signals to it are wrong. We're inflicting bodily harm in the church if we're not being truthful with each other. I may not see the implications of my untruthfulness or your untruthfulness, but it has a way of affecting. We're not living in isolation. We're living in a community, and we need to recognize that truth affects our life together. We have a Redeemer who has redeemed us from that old way of life. Therefore, let us set our eyes on him and on the truth where he is that is above. And let's bring that down into our experience, into our own lives. And let us speak the truth in love to one another. Let's live the truth, walk the truth as we live with one another together. If you need to respond, will you do that while we stand and sing?